within 3 minutes. We're 3 minutes early, Charles, and so I'll introduce you. We have the bio has already been presented as far as the chat is concerned. He is there. But Chief Charles A. Taku is going to be sharing his information and views. And Charles, if I can call you that, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. And I must thank the organizers for providing us this platform on The Voice to have this discussion about Africa, especially in times of their needs, in times where of these challenges of COVID-19, the other complex issues facing Africa. I will start my presentation from the perspective that Africa is coming to these problems from a very disadvantaged position, because Africa, until the early 1960s, was not a subject of international law. Indeed, the first and second peace conferences, 1889 and 1907, Africa was never been contemplated. At the creation of the United Nations, Africa was not subject to international law. The founders of the United Nations themselves did not imagine that non-state actors will rise to prominence and will direct or impact on a lot of world affairs, including the capacity to wage war, the capacity to control the world economy, to breach the frontiers of sovereignty, and to pose either a threat or provide solutions to world problems. That was never in the UN Charter. You wouldn't find that. You find they were not even contemplated. But however, on becoming independent, Africa took several measures to try to meet the world challenges. I will start this by looking at the scoreboard of Africa on this area of international law, especially from the multilateral framework that exists, that is in place in Africa in order to meet the challenges. And if that multilateral framework were activated, or there was a political will to enforce them, Africa will never be taken by surprise. Africa will have had a ready answer to its the health challenges, food security, the wars, the bloodletting on the continent, the corruption, and other challenges that present Africa today as a troubled continent. Permit me to mention some of them before I bring my suggestions on how to mitigate or resolve the challenges that we are facing today, especially in Africa. The Lagos Plan of Action and the Final Act of Lagos, 1980, for incorporating programs for self-reliance and cooperation among African countries. The Africa Charter on Human and People's Rights, 1981, Nairobi. Africa's Priority Program for Economic Recovery, 1985. OAU Declaration of Political and Socio-Economic Situation in Africa and Fundamental Changes Taking Place in the World, 1990. The Charter on Popular Participation, 1990. The Abuja Treaty, Charter Establishing African Economic Community, 1991. The Mechanism for Conflict Prevention, Management and Resolution, 1993. Cairo Agenda for Action, 1995. African Common Position on African External Debt Crisis, 1997. The Algiers Decision on Unconstitutional Change of Government, 1999. Lomé Declaration on the Framework for OAU Response to Unconstitutional Changes of Government, 2000. The Constitutional Act of the African Union adopted in Lomé in 2000 and entered into force in 2001. NEPAT, Lusaka, 2001. The Malabo Protocol to the African Court on Human and People's Rights, 2014. The African Charter on the Rights on the right away from the chair in 1990. Then the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty signed in 1996, which came into effect in July 2009, also called Treaty of Palendeba, the site of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. The AU Team of the Year, we all know, is Silencing Guns 2020 initiative. The African, of course, we have the African Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that strengthens the capacity and capability of Africa's public health institutions, as well as partnerships to detect and respond quickly and effectively to disease threats and outbreaks based on data-driven intervention and programs. Now, let's look at the record. An anxious look at the foreign and national investment policies in Africa against available investment opportunities and the investment needs of the continent justifies the characterization of Africa as a continent which is constantly begging to be recognized. This is one bedrock of corruption. Corruption through some multilateral interventions and also through African governments that have carefully kept the investment contracts, investment policies of Africa away from the Africans themselves, from the participants, from their own local experts. In the result, as a quid pro quo for externalizing power, the African leaders manage the national resources of Africa, the mineral resources and other resources. It is a no-go area. It's only for them and some multinationals. Of course, even the international negotiations, they hardly associate the experts, and they keep them away. They keep the secret. It's a secret, state secret, because it's a quid pro quo. This is the high hallmark of corruption on the continent, in the manner in which few people look in that direction when they talk about corruption. In this way, many African countries are being ruled by proxy. The proxy using puppets to internalize power for themselves and their families. Now, before independence, the foreign trade policy of Africa, European colonies, were imposed rather than negotiated. African economies were rudimentary and mainly aimed at producing and supplying raw material for the European industrial commercial market. The huge mineral deposits and agricultural potential belonged to colonial powers and their citizens. In an address in Oxford University in 1949, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe strongly opposed the fact that land and resources in Nigeria and the Cameroons, although belonging to indigenous people, as a matter of colonial imperial policy, in reality belonged to Her Majesty the Queen of England, Queen of England's government. Now, many colonial African institutional independence were controlled and managed by imposed military, monetary, economic, educational, social, cultural cooperation treaties that subjugated the economic sovereignty of the colonies or of the new independent countries to elsewhere colonial masters. These colonial treaties subsist. The currency in the French colonies, as well as the economic policy, including the cultural policies, the politics. Of course, an example is the agreement that was signed by Amadou Ahidjo of Cameroon on December 12, 1959, that gave the sovereignty over key areas of the Cameroon economy and political power and the currency, of course, the currency to the French government and the French treasury. That treaty has lately, I think 2012 or 2011, been modified, but it's subsisting. There is a lack of a Pan-African or continental safety net and transboundary strategy for food security, desertification, secure water resources for human consumption, for resource exploitation, for maritime transportation, agricultural resources, fishing and sustainable fishing, and also sustainable research. There is a paucity of bilateral and multilateral treaties on the joint management and exploitation of Africa's marine economy. E.g., we have the dispute over the Nile, the negotiation on the use of the Nile. Where there exists, the management is ridden with corruption and mismanagement. The Doha round on the multilateral trade by members of the World Trade Organization did not favor Africa because the US refused to remove subsidies from US agricultural products, making it extremely hard for African agricultural products to be competitive. However, the reduction of subsidies on that was decided in the Nairobi round of negotiations was greatly mitigated by global trade barriers, which are still largely unfavorable to Africa. The Nairobi Agreement compromise, which aims at boosting the economic growth of developing countries, centering on reducing agricultural subsidies, allowing them to export agricultural products in exchange, open up economies, the African economies and that of developing countries, to the developing countries, particularly in the banking sector and finance, which is again not so much in favor of Africa. Confused and disjointed response to mondialization, technological advancement and transfer of technology and investments have hampered African appropriate response, either continental or within African countries, to emerging and challenging world trends. Health security deficit. No comprehensive state-by-state, regional or continental policy or multilateral treaty on health security exists to counter pandemics. Africa is not new to these health challenges. We have the Ebola before, we have the AIDS, we have the malaria, but now we have the COVID-19. Lack of focus and support for a Pan-African or continental scientific network to encourage real-world research and accredit and validate scientific research outcomes on the continent. African conflict. There's a lack of political will to establish an African Center for Arbitration, for Resolution of Investment Conflict, and a strong enforcement regime for existing treaties. There's a clear lack of economic sovereignty. There's a lack of continental commitment to pluralistic participatory democracy. On September 9, 1999, the African head of state met in Libya and transformed the AU to African Union with the objective to accelerating the progress of the integration of the continent. But the report is that the lack of support of African governments for African multilateral treaty regime or African institutions that they themselves negotiated in good faith for them to ratify and sign upon them and enforce them is simply alarming. Lately, because the African Court for Human People's Rights in Arusha, Tanzania, delivered judgments against the government of Rwanda, against citizens, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin Republic, and Tanzania, they withdrew the individual mandate. They withdrew the authorization for their citizens to bring cases directly against the governments to the African Court for Human and People's Rights. The ability of Africans on the continent African to bring cases to the citizens to bring cases to the African Court for Human and People's Rights was a welcome development of the continent, where the legal institutions in the African countries are either weak or totally corrupt or dominated by executive interference to the extent of politicizing them. The militarization of justice in African countries, the disrespect for court decisions is so alarming and extremely shameful as to render the legal systems in African countries extremely weak. For more than 20 years in international criminal courts, I first came to the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda on the 25th of October 1999 and have remained in the international court system ever since. From there, I went to Sierra Leone, as David said, and to the ICC, where I am also lead counsel in the institution for Darfur, Jinabanda, the Central African Republic, Northern Uganda. And in all this conflict, I have been involved with refugees. We call them victims, but they are refugees and internally displaced. I've been to the battlefields and I've seen them at first hand, and I know the situation they face. I've also been involved in pushing international organizations to take the Trans-Sahara migration program to take it up as an emergency, a national international emergency, especially the massacre of people in the death of people, which are called massacre in the Mediterranean. This migration pandemic, like I say, is extremely serious. So far, I'm seeing very little action. Of late, I only saw one governor in Nigeria, Obaseki, the governor of Edo State, who took concrete and laudable action in order to mitigate the young girls and young people from Edo State from migrating to Europe that are found in the streets of France, in Belgium, in Italy. It is only that Obaseki, yes, his name is Obaseki, the governor of Edo State of Nigeria, who took it up as a government program in his state to make sure that Edo girls and boys and men who should be in school, who should be empowered, are resettled to stay home and have to participate in the political life of their state and their country. On the wars of Africa that have displaced thousands of people, the loss of the value for humans' life in Africa is so alarming. Permit me to cite my own case, what I can call the slaughter, the carnage of the southern Cameroonians from the ancestral homelands, and hundreds of thousands of them deported into Nigeria, where luckily the governors of the neighboring state in Nigeria, on their own, even without support from the federal government, is doing their best with the refugee agencies, whom I must take this opportunity to thank, to take care of these refugees.
Chief Taku, 5 more minutes.
Yes. Now, all these are happening on the watch of the civilized world, on the watch of Africa. The African Union is doing absolutely nothing. And therefore, my suggestion is that a multilateral treaty regime exists. The political will is not there. We should all campaign as that African governments should put in place to activate this multilateral treaty for the purpose of good governance, for democracy, to meet this pandemic, so that we can also try to contribute African solution to African problems while welcoming the assistance from the international community, from the United States and other countries. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. We're going to take questions right at the very end, if that's okay with you. And now we have Sarah. Sarah, welcome to the conference, and thank you for joining us. Let me get back up to Sarah's bio. Her bio is actually in the chat section of this conference. So if you'd like to look up the information about Sarah, but she's with Amnesty International, and also she's a very world-renowned author and published a number of books. So Sarah, we're not going to take up your time. Thank you for being here, and please go ahead and share with our audience.
Hi, thank you. Just checking, is the microphone working?
Yes, you're coming through loud and clear. We can't see you, but you're coming through loud and